Today, live co-host David dives deeply into one of the most iconic and beloved episodes of Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Discover fascinating behind-the-scenes secrets, hidden details, and untold stories that will give you a whole new perspective on this fan-favourite classic. This is one not to miss.
Hey everyone, I'm David and welcome back to Sci-Finatics. You might have seen me as a regular guest on the live streams over the last couple of years. This time round, Nick's asked me to jump in with a bit of a retro perspective on a past Star Trek episode. Today we'll be covering Deep Space Nine's In the Pale Moonlight, which was the 19th episode of Season 6. So In the Pale Moonlight, that's a fairly beloved episode in Star Trek amongst fans, and also it's one of my personal favourites. It's not like a large VFX-driven battle sequence type episode like, say, Call to Arms or Way of the Warrior. It's more of a deeply character-driven story. And, essentially this sort of sees Captain Sisko's journey into darkness between, he's trying to reconcile his Starfleet ideals and his moral compass and trading that off against the difficult yet arguably necessary actions that he feels he has to take given the casualties in the Dominion War are mounting and it's not going very well for the Federation. Incidentally, the episode title refers to a line from the Batman movie from 1989 where you had Jack Nicholson's Joker. Just before he would do a kill, he would say... "You
ever dance with the devil in the pale moonlight?"
The story was inspired by pivotal moments in US history. For example, you've got the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which led to the Vietnam War, and also the Watergate scandal, which saw the downfall of Nixon. And it was kind of like these moments they were trying to sort of capture in a bottle for this episode. Essentially, you had Peter Allen Fields, who was commissioned to write it. He was tasked to create a bit of a political controversy episode with some serious repercussions for the Alpha Quadrant. Initially, it went by the working title The Patriot. And we kind of had started off with a bit of a Jake versus his father piece, where initially Jake had uncovered some dirt on Bajoran First Minister Shakar. This would have brought down the Bajoran government in the time of the Dominion War. Not really desired outcome. So Sisko Sr. has to quench Jake's enthusiastic journalism. That then went into a manifestation where we had Garak being pressed by Jake for some dirty goss from his side. Garak doesn't really share a lot of his secrets, and when Jake pressed his father to see if he could get him to talk a bit, Sisko pushed back, and then Jake gets a little suspicious and uncovers a bit of a plot line there involving Garak and Captain Sisko, involving bringing the Romulans into the war under false pretenses. So that kind of led us into the final version that we saw today. That version was actually written by Ronald D. Moore as the final draft, although he was uncredited for that episode. But they removed Jake from the storyline entirely because they felt that conflict between him and Sisko was probably not going to work so well. So we pick up with this story. It's set midway through the Dominion War. We've had the Sacrifice of Angels episode where the Dominion's been kicked out of DS9. Although the minefield that was stopping the Dominion reinforcements coming through, that's come down. We had the standoff there with the Defiant. Flies into the wormhole, is about to take on the 2,800 Jem'Hadar warships, and then they miraculously disappear thanks to the Bajoran prophets. Where they went, we never know, but anyway, the Dominion wasn't going to try a stunt like that again, so they had to be fairly Alpha Quadrant reliant. Meanwhile, the Federation and the Klingons, they've been licking their wounds. They've taken some heavy hits up until now. Not only have you had the hot phase of the war with the Dominion, you've also had, if you remember, the Klingons and the Federation at each other's throat a little bit earlier on, thanks to some Dominion engineering. However, the Dominion seem to have recovered a bit quicker. Their shipyards are running at 100% capacity. They're breeding these legions of Alpha Quadrant Jem'Hadar warriors by the day, although they still have probably some constraints around the Ketrasil White coming through. The Dominions felt strong enough to start re-engaging in combat with the Klingons and the Federation, and they're right across the border, they're attacking them all out. And this is just taxing the Federation, which is still recovering from this succession of wars and conflicts. It's not ready for this. And you've also got the Romulans and the Tholians. They've signed their non-aggression pact, so they're out of the fight. They're not going to come into play on this. The episode opens with Sisko recording a personal log. He sort of reflects on the past 2 weeks. And he's sitting on the couch with a bit of a stiff drink. So he's sort of, it's like a bit of a confessional sort of atmosphere. He's talking directly to the camera, which is probably a bit rare in Star Trek episodes, I've got to say. And the audience takes on the persona of computer, confiding in computer, doing a log. Sisko, he's pretty disheveled. He's worn down. He's struggling to remember the star date. It's clear that there's this heavy weight pressing down on him. He then sort of starts taking us back to a flashback to about 2 weeks earlier, where he just posted the latest Federation weekly casualty list. And every week, this touches on a member of the station. Someone looking at that list usually finds, a friend or a relative, someone they know. Jadzia recognizes a name. She recognizes the captain of the USS Cairo, who was ambushed while patrolling the Romulan neutral zone. And it becomes apparent that the Romulans, with their non-aggression pact, are kind of letting the Dominion cross their backyard, give the Federation a bloody nose, and then come back again unscathed. Incidentally, the USS Cairo came up as wreckage on a Delta Quadrant world controlled by the Kazon in the Prodigy episode The Fast and the Curious. Maybe it had a different fate than we actually thought. Anyway, we have some discussion between Jadzia and Bashir about the possibility of, what if the Romulans were brought into the Dominion War on the Federation side? This sort of triggers a door-opening moment for Sisko, where he goes, I need to bring the Romulans into the war. This decision could have also been a bit influenced not only by the casualties there, but we also had a few episodes back in the Far Beyond the Stars episode. He'd lost his friend, Captain Swafford of the USS Cortez, which kind of was a trigger point for that episode where he had a bit of an emotional breakdown. So could be all these things building up and then, resulting in this fateful decision. Then after that, Sisko and Jadzia, they engage in a bit of a mock debate with each other about, the Romulans joining the war. Sisko's sort of advocating the involvement of Romulus, and Jadzia's playing the Romulan proconsul, opposing getting involved. Sisko argues fairly logically the Romulans would probably be the next Dominion's target once they're finished with the Federation and the Klingons, and then Jadzia counters that saying, well, the Dominion are attacking the Federation. That's not giving us any grief. It's not harming Romulan interests. I'd want really proof of any duplicity before I, put millions of Romulan lives that could potentially be lost. In terms of any evidence for where there is some war plans there that the Dominion may have for attacking Romulus, this would be far outreach. They'd probably have plans, but they're not going to find this because it's probably going to be deep within the bowels of Dominion headquarters on Cardassia Prime, way out of any reachable area. However, of course, we have our friendly, duplicitous Cardassian on the station, Garrick. Sisko approaches Garrick about whether he would be interested in getting involved, and Garrick sort of says, yeah, I could, but it's going to cost pretty heavily. It's going to get dirty and messy, and I'm probably going to use up all my resources on Cardassia Prime. It's a suicide mission, basically. Sisko says, well, the war's already dirty. I'm committed. I'm in. We've got to make this happen. It's the war is having such a dire cost as it is. He's got a whatever it takes approach. Sisko then learns that Beta Zed's fallen. Gets one of those night calls from those horrible calls in the night where there's some bad news. And you guessed it, a major Federation planet has fallen. Got caught by surprise. It was Beta Zed, and it fell to the Jem'Hadar in under 10 hours. It caught the Federation with their pants down. The 10th fleet that was meant to be protecting Beta Zed was off doing maneuvers somewhere. Their defenses were undermanned and a bit outdated and so forth. So it basically now brings the Dominion much closer to some of the core worlds of the Federation, like Vulcan, and then you're in Earth's backyard practically. So pretty serious development here. It's worth mentioning probably at this point also that the writers were looking for a world that was going to be the one that fell to the Dominion. They were sort of contemplating Vulcan, but they thought, oh no, that carries too much weight. So Beta Z sort of, I guess, ended up being kind of like the right approach. Unless you had maybe a whole legion of Zlon suitors or something defending their defenses, that might have been a different outcome perhaps. So the stakes are rising. Sisko then pressures Garrick for progress, how did you go? Garrick sort of says, yep, they're all interested, but they're all dead. Thanks to the efficiency of Dominion security. Thank you very much, guys. Garrick then proposes, surprise, surprise, a new plan, which is to fabricate the evidence. If they can't get it anymore from deep down in the bowels of Cardassia Prime, let's make something up that tries to get the Romulans into the war. So he's thought about this. He's picked out someone called Senator Vreenak, who he's going to be passing by the station or could make a detour. And he's the man to convince. He's a Romulan senator. He was involved pivotally in the non-aggression treaty with the Dominion. So if you can get this guy over the line, you'll probably get the rest of the Romulan Senate over the line. That's the person. The how, then we kind of get into this story about this Cardassian data rod. It's very rare to get these things. They're super encrypted and they're beyond doubt if something's recorded on them. But they're going to put some fake or fabricated evidence on there, which implicates the Dominion's plans to conquer Romulus. And they hope to then convince Vreenak that, hey, you're going to be next if you don't do something about this. Here's the evidence. The concept of the fake data rod can be attributed to Michael Taylor, who wrote the teleplay for this episode. Inspired by the notorious Zimmerman telegram of 1917, which was a secret diplomatic communication proposing a German-Mexican military alliance against the US, Taylor aimed to replicate the public outrage that led to American involvement in World War I. The intercepted telegram, which promised German support for Mexico to reclaim US territory, ignited strong anti-German sentiment in the US at the time, ultimately drawing the nation into this global conflict. So, to make the forgery credible, they used this genuine Cardassia data rod, which is very rare. It's also worth pointing out that I don't think Garrick probably lost any operatives on the Cardassia operation as part of the initial plan, because literally in the adjoining scene, he sort of tells Sisko to embellish the story with Senator Vreenak about, oh, well, we got this data rod with these secret plans on it. 10 good people died, bring this across the line, and sort of embellish it. So it sounds almost like he's used the resources thing and just flipped it in this case. It's kind of a bit like, many Bothans died to bring us this information. Garrick then informs Sisko that he'll need to free this guy by the name of Graython Tolar, who's a bit of a crim. He's a holographic forger, and he's currently, as it happens, on Kronos, we would presume, on death row. He's about to be executed. So he's not favoured by the Klingons, and apparently Tolar's the only one in the quadrant who can create such a forgery on this data rod, which seems a bit unusual. In an earlier draft of the script, Graython Tolar was in trouble with the Klingons as he'd been accused of murdering a High Council member's son. For those of you out there with a keen eye for detail, you might have recognised Tolar's outfit was a reuse of the character Gideon Seatek from the Deep Space Nine episode Second Sight, as well as the outfit that Kellen wore in the Voyager episode Dreadnought. Sisko then has to convince Chancellor Gowron to free up Tolar, although he's a bit concerned about how this is playing out, about getting Starfleet's approval. Garrick sort of says, look, you'll probably get it. I mean, with Beta Z fallen, you're going to get it. Starfleet ultimately agrees, and that's interesting. They're very flexible when it comes to things like that. It's worth pointing out here that the episode really shines in terms of the interactions between Sisko and the charming but Machiavellian Garrick. I love his character. He's really great. Avery Brooks and Andrew Robinson really delivering some standout performances. He's following the trail of breadcrumbs in this episode that Garrick's dishing out, and these breadcrumbs are becoming increasingly harder to digest as the episode unfolds. But Sisko, he's looking at the long game. He stays the course on the proviso that hopefully the ends justifies the means. But hey, we've got a way to go yet. So Gowron manages to pardon Tolar and he arrives on DS9. Sisko sort of explains that his parole requires him to create a special holographic program. I think initially Tolar sort of thinks it's going to be something with Orion slave girls in it, misunderstanding, until Garrick's name's dropped into the conversation and it becomes apparent this is pretty serious. So he agrees to cooperate to avoid, going back to the Klingons to be executed. It doesn't take long though before Tolar gets into some trouble. He gets drunk at Quark's, and I think he tries to force a dance with Impella, one of the Dubbo girls. That escalates. Quark then becomes very chivalrous, which is a bit rare for him. He gets stabbed by Tolar, and it gets into a complete fiasco. Odo's involved. Apparently Tolar sort of said, well, I'm a friend of Captain Sisko, trying to get out of things. And Sisko turns up and has a chat with Odo and says, no, then we're not friends, but he is doing something important for the Federation, related to Federation security. Odo's hands are a bit tied, can't sort of just let Tolar off the leash. If Quark wants to press charges, he can. And of course, Sisko then has a bit of a chat, this awkward chat with Quark. It's really funny to watch this. The level of squirming is 11 out of 10. Quark very quickly he says, oh, I'm definitely going to, absolutely going to, press charges. And Sisko says, well, what would it take for you not to do that? And then Quark sort of goes, well, so this is a bribe? Okay. He's sniffing around. Long story short, it takes 5 bars of gold-pressed latinum, a payment for the damaged clothes, and the release of some sort of illegally impounded merchandise that we don't quite find out what it is, to actually convince Quark to say, that's a bribe. I'm in. It just finishes with Quark saying, after 6 years on the show, he's finally got Sisko where he wants him, and it reaffirms his faith in the 98th rule of acquisition: every man has their price. Now it's amping up further. Sisko's having some real doubts here. He presses on after the latest Federation casualty list gets posted. And meanwhile, going back to the Cardassian data rod, Garrick has apparently found someone willing to sell it, but the price is pretty high. It requires 200 litres of something called biomimetic gel, which is a fairly dangerous and tightly controlled substance for the Federation. Sisko initially rejects the price, And then Garrick sort of suggests, well, it's probably negotiable, the amount, you could probably go a bit less. Sisko then orders Bashir to release 85 litres of this biomimetic gel. Bashir he's sort of like, going, what? He's kind of like, completely like, this stuff makes biogenic weapons. It can create organic explosives. It can do all sorts of nasty stuff. And he's really surprised at why Sisko's asking for this. He wants to know where it's going and get a bit of, there's some accountability here. Sisko's just saying, no, I've given you, I've anticipated that you want this in writing. Here's your written order. I need it by the end of the day. No questions asked. Bashir sort of says, okay, well, I'll do it, but I'm going to make a formal report to Starfleet Medical, and that's it. Sisko's going further down this rabbit hole. So we have the data rod then obtained. We've got Sisko, Garrick, and Tolar inspecting this relatively convincing hollow forgery of this secret war plan meeting that's going on between Wayun and Damar discussing the invasion of Romulus. And it includes, a bit of nominal petty bickering and loathing, which makes it just more realistic. And then the recording is complete. They've gone through a few iterations of this recording, it seems, and they're hitting the final record button. They're done. Then Tolar thinks he's off the hook. Okay, there's your recording. Off you go. I'm out of here. No. Sisko really changes the deal. I'm changing the deal. And Tolar's going, well, no, that wasn't the deal. I just had to do this for you. And then Sisko's saying, well, if this doesn't pass, you're going back to Galron and you're going back to death row. Incidentally, there was a continuation of the scene in which Sisko was putting the hard word on Tolar in the holosuite. This was dropped in the televised episode. In this scene, Garrick suggested that Sisko enjoyed the moment of pure brute force, to which Sisko responded with, Mr. Garrick, why is it that no one has killed you yet? To which Garrick retorted, my innate charm. After laughing it off, Sisko later mentions this in his personal log. It would have probably been wise of Sisko, I think, at this point to have, maybe earlier said, maybe Tolar could have done a little bit more to get the forgery a little bit closer to the mark if he'd known that his head was on the block like this. Anyway, they've got the recording. Garrick menacingly says, I'll drop by your quarters to say hello later. Senator Vreenak's on the way. The fake recording's complete. Starfleet, once again, give their blessing to the plan. Sort of lets Sisko off the hook in one respect, but he's very much on the call face, having to pull this stunt off and convince Vreenak eye to eye. So he gets a secret coded signal through operations that indicates that his shuttle is right there, cloaked near DS9. They've pre-closed off a section of the station with security, so no one's there except for Sisko and Garrick. Guards posted around the area. Sisko then just opens up an airlock. The lift goes up, comes down, the doors close, and then materializes a Romulan shuttle. It's quite impressive actually seeing this, and it's probably it's a new design of shuttle, which we haven't seen a new ship in Romulan fleet for a while. And then Garrick warns Sisko about Vreenak having a certain superiority and a certain acerbic nature, and says you just have to be aware of that. And he's going to covertly enter the Romulan shuttle to see what he can glean, what sort of Dominion secrets he can probably get. Enters Senator Vreenak, who's portrayed by Stephen McCatty. A really good actor, I gotta say. He enters the scene bringing his sharp, acerbic attitude to the episode. The dialogue between Vreenak and Sisko is particularly memorable. Vreenak sort of quickly establishes his superiority and sort of expresses his disdain for Starfleet with some cutting remarks. And he also mocks Sisko with this line, reels off his resume, and then at the end of it says, oh yes, and the man that started the war with the Dominion. Somehow I thought you'd be taller. It's kind of like, that's obviously a hark back to Sisko putting the self-replicating minefield, deploying that in front of the Bajoran wormhole and cutting off Dominion reinforcements back in Call to Arms, and that sort of sparked off the hot phase of the Dominion War. Interestingly enough, McCaddy also was in Star Trek Enterprise's third season, and he played an alien foreman in the episode Xindi. McCaddy was actually considered and auditioned for the role of Odo back in 1992, which of course ultimately went to Rene Auberjonois. So we then go into the wardroom, and this discussion unfolds between Senator Vreenak and Sisko over a bottle of Califal, which kind of looks like Romulan ale. It's blue, like toilet cleaner or something. Vreenak shares a pretty blunt assessment of the war, and he's comparing the Federation versus the Dominion. This is really interesting. I love all this sort of stuff. Talking about the shipbuilding capacities, where the Federation's really struggling and the Dominion are cranking ships out at 100% capacity. The breeding of millions of Jem'Hadar Alpha Quadrant clones every day, and Federation got a manpower shortage, and then we've also got the resolve factor. The Dominion are completely resolved to win this war at any cost, whereas the Federation is starting to put out the peace feelers. It also suggests that if their shipyards are at 100% capacity, if we go back to Call to Arms, I seem to recall at the end of the episode, the reason why the Federation wasn't present to defend Deep Space Nine was because them and the Klingons teamed up and went and destroyed the Taurus 3 shipyards, which then presumably put Dominion shipbuilding capacity way behind. So they must have regained their capacity, built up, they're pumping out starships. Conversely, you got the Federation struggling to keep up. They're pressing mothballed ships into service, taking them out of retirement, and then new ships, new builds are being rushed through, into service before they're properly fitted out and stuff. There's a complete disparity there in terms of the total war capabilities of both areas. Sisko then sort of tries to crack Vrenak's steely view on things. Sisko counters with a bit of a strong argument, echoing, the earlier debate with Jadzia, warning that the Romulans would soon find themselves surrounded by the Dominion. Vrenak is nearly convinced. He's kind of remarking the Khalifal is growing on him, which is an underlay for Sisko's got a strong argument, and it's starting to convince him. He gets where he's coming from, but he remains a bit skeptical about the whole thing, and it's just speculation. Vrenak, he seems to be warming a little bit to Sisko. He seems to have a bit of a glimmer of respect for him. So anyway, Sisko has to then play his trump card, which is basically revealing this Dominion sneak attack plan, this forged one, which of course Vrenak says, well, I want proof. So we go to Sisko presenting this fabricated recording to Vrenak. Vrenak's really carefully studying the room. He's looking at Wayun and Damar and the battle plan on the wall there, studying Sisko's, walking around him, studying his reactions. And then of course he asks to see the recording himself. I got to say, I found the Dominion strategy in the recording a little bit had some strange weaknesses to it, in terms of the fact that the Dominion would be able to disengage from the Federation and the Klingons and just go and make another front and attack Romulus directly, and that the Romulan fleet, which was massed around the Federation neutral zone border, would be delayed in then reacting. And this is pointed out by Damar in it as a point. It's kind of brushed over a little bit, like don't doubt the founder's plans, something like that. If we go back to, say, the Dyer's Cast, we had the combined Tal Shiar and Obsidian Order attack on the founder's homeworld. They lost a small fleet there, but largely the Romulan fleet is intact. It's fresh. It's ready for battle. If they got a whiff that the Dominion was starting to attack Romulus, I would expect it wouldn't take them long to get back to actually then try to intervene. The Dominion are still engaged on other fronts with the Klingons and the Federation. So this would to me seem like a risky move. It's spreading the jam thinner on the bread, and I just felt that was probably a bit unlikely. After that, Vrenak's going and doing what he has to do. Sisko's anxiously awaiting the news. He sort of imparts a little bit of a story about his father, about waiting. He says, the souffle is going to rise or it's going to fall, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. But, he's weighing up. If things go wrong, this could go south very quickly. The Romulans could align with the Dominion against the Federation in its worst outcome. Incidentally, there was a scene written where Jadzia entered Sisko's office and suggests to Sisko that they fabricate some evidence that the Dominion is planning an attack on Romulus. But of course, she was unaware that Sisko was already cooking up something with Garrick. Sisko tries to convince her against this, but says that he'll think about it. Anyway, the pivotal moment arrives, which leads to that iconic internet meme, "It's a fake!" which Vrenak snarls at a stunned Sisko. I love Sisko's reaction. It's like the blood drains from his face. It's the worst case scenario, but it's unclear to me, did he really have the equipment to study this on his shuttle? Or was he just maybe trying it on the size, just to sort of see what Sisko was how he was going to react? I guess we don't know. But regardless, it would have been interesting to be a fly on the wall in that conversation. Vrenak was furious, and he said he's going to expose this whole disgusting charade to the entire Alpha Quadrant. And then he returns to Romulus. Things couldn't get any worse for Sisko, and the souffle definitely hadn't risen, folks. But of course, there are plans within plans at work here. And a few days later, they're at another one of these weekly casualty updates. Worf mentions to Sisko that Vrenak's shuttle's been destroyed on its return from Romulus. And this was after this diplomatic meeting with the Dominion. The Tal Shiar are investigating, but they have some initial suspicions that the Dominion sabotaged the shuttle for whatever reason. Ronald D. Moore had written some additional scenes which took place on Vrenak's shuttle, showing how the plot played out leading up to the explosion after it had departed from DS9 for Romulus. However, it was felt that these scenes weren't needed, and they were dropped in the interest of time and budgetary reasons. Sisko obviously realizes what's happened, and he goes in and he literally hits up Garrick. He punches him a couple of times. He's furious, absolutely furious. He feels very used, and he didn't want to have part in this murder going on. Garrick sort of says, he said, "Did you do this?" And Garrick says, yes, he did. He planted the bomb on Vreenak's ship. He sort of explained that with the shuttle destroyed, the data rod forgery, any imperfections in this would just be attributed to the effects of the explosion, which would kind of lead them to believe that Vreenak had somehow picked up some incriminating recording on Sara about a Dominion attack on Romulus. Again, why it would be on Sara instead of on Cardassia Prime is another question, leading to the belief that Dominion assassinated Vreenak to cover up their plans. He's found out too much. And the recording will implicate the Dominion. Garrick justifies killing Vreenak and, of course, Tolar, who we mentioned he'd also murdered, claiming that the Alpha Quadrant may have just been saved at the cost of these lives. A criminal, a Romulan senator, and one captain's self-respect, and actually some crew of a Romulan shuttlecraft. And he calls that a bargain, which it looks like it is. It's not explicitly stated in the episode, but I think it's inferred that Garrick had the data rod all along. There was no buyer. He had it. He probably had it there from his Obsidian Order days. And the biomimetic gel he would have used to fabricate the explosives that went into the Romulan shuttle. Vreenak appears to have been doomed the moment he stepped onto DS9. Even if Vreenak had not said it's a fake and believed it to be real, when that data rod was taken back to Romulus and it went through the scrutiny of the Tal Shiar, they would have likely detected the forgery there. So this thing couldn't get back regardless. That just had to be dealt with. And then Tolar was unfortunately a disposable loose end that needed to be eliminated. This sort of is quite a showcase of Garrick's abilities as an operative. He must have been one hell of an operative in the Obsidian Order. That's all I'll say. So Sisko reflects on his actions in a private log. Hears that the Romulan Empire has declared war on the Dominion, and they started attacking like 15 bases along the Cardassian border. Sisko is wrestling with his conscience. He's ultimately accepting that, he could live with it and would make the same decision again if faced with the same circumstances. But it sort of seems like Sisko's actually trying to convince himself of this, that he can really live with it. I can live with it. And then he deletes the personal log. And then that's the end of the episode. So I think overall, this was a really strong episode, and it kind of departs from, Gene Roddenberry's very idealistic vision of Star Trek. And it delves into this darker territory, which is really interesting. It encapsulates a bit of a dichotomy between upholding of Starfleet and Federation ideals and the costs that have to be paid to keep Paradise safe. In a universe where I guess not everyone operates by the same playbook that you do, you have to sometimes play dirty for the greater good. And I think Andrew Robinson, who played Garrick, he sort of said of the episode, you can't go to the bed with the devil without having sex. So you've got to get your hands dirty. I think this story also had a very strong Section 31 flavour, and it's interesting to note that the preceding story, being Inquisition, also was the first episode to introduce Section 31. I think the dynamic between Sisko and Garrick is the highlight of the episode. Both characters, they kind of use each other for their respective goals. I think in their final confrontation, Garrick basically forces Sisko to confront the reality of the situation. You needed me to do what you weren't willing to do yourself. And there's also some strong parallels to this, and I guess the earlier episodes with Admiral Layton called Homefront and Paradise Lost. In that one, Layton was the bad guy, but in this one, Sisko remains one of the good guys. It kind of leaves the lines between good and evil very blurred within this moral grey that we're sort of exploring in this very seminal episode. I think the episode clearly confronts some uncomfortable things that, we sometimes have to do and we don't like to associate ourselves with, which are needed to preserve the peace that we actually enjoy. There is a price to this. Sometimes it's hard when that mirror is held up, as it clearly is to Sisko in this particular story, to face what's in the mirror. And as the episode progresses, we sort of see Sisko gradually remove or unzip clothing in this personal log as we keep cutting back to those scenes, and he's confessing his sins and bearing his soul to the audience. And I think the outcome, although it's morally questionable, it shifts the balance of the war with the Dominion. It actually enables, with the Romulans coming on board, for Team Alpha Quadrant to go on the offensive, at least for several episodes until those green guys make a dramatic entrance. So there we go. That's in the Pale Moonlight. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the episode. If you'd like to see more retrospective videos like this on Sci-Finatics, then look, drop us a like, drop us a comment, and we'll have a look at that. So until next time, folks, bye for now.